Good evening, mesdames et messieurs, distingués invités. Bonsoir et bienvenue au Musée canadien de l'Histoire. Welcome to the Canadian Museum of History. We're delighted to have you here. My name is Mark O'Neill, and I'm the president and CEO of this museum and its sister institution, the Canadian War Museum. I'd like to highlight the presence this evening of Dr. Rodney Nelson. Dr. Nelson is professor and coordinator of the Indigenous Enriched Support Program at Carleton University, my alma mater. And I'm also pleased to say that he is one of the Museum of History's new board members. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Nelson. Also with us is a former member of our Board of Trustees, Mr. Harvey Slack, who continues to be very supportive of both of our museums. And finally, I would like to acknowledge the presence of someone I consider to be a great friend, not only to myself, but to the museum, and who is in fact the architect of this incredible building in which it is housed, the incomparable Douglas Cardinal, who you'll be hearing from this evening. This museum is proud to have this opportunity to partner with the Walrus Foundation on this important event. We're always pleased to work with an organization that sees the value in fostering informed discussion, and God knows we need it, and debate on subjects of significance to all Canadians. The theme of this edition of Walrus Talks, the Indigenous City, is both timely and compelling. I think Canadians understand the importance of highlighting the significant contributions made to contemporary life in Canada by Indigenous curators, artists, doctors, lawyers, politicians, and entrepreneurs from every possible field. During the development of our new Canadian History Hall here at the museum, we worked closely with Indigenous leaders, influencers, and representatives of a number of communities from around the country to ensure their stories were told in their own voices in the hall. We wanted our visitors to understand the immense impact Indigenous peoples have had and continue to have on the unfolding of our national narrative. L'équipe de la salle de l'histoire jugée essentiel que ces récits autochtones soient pleinement intégrés à la trame globale et non présentés à part comme c'est trop souvent le cas. Les trois galeries de la salle comptent donc les récits autochtones relatant des événements emblématiques. En fait, le premier module qui verront les visiteurs dans la salle consiste en l'interprétation des récits de la création Anishinabekwe par un artiste algonquin à travers la voix d'une aînée locale. Notre histoire nationale s'est inspirée des peuples autochtones et de l'ensemble de leurs réalisations. Cet apport est de plus en plus présent dans nos lois, dans notre approche environnementale et dans nos arts. Cette influence est aussi palpable au Musée canadien de l'Histoire et le Musée canadien de la guerre, et c'est une excellente nouvelle. Renowned historian David Christian once said, "All Indigenous traditions, all origin stories provide a large map of where you are." As we consider the all too often unsung contributions of Indigenous peoples to urban life, it is perhaps worth remembering that by honoring and embracing their storied past, we cannot help but inform the future. I would now like to introduce Shelley Ambrose, Executive Director and Publisher of The Walrus. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you. Merci, Miigwech, Mark and Verna for the welcomes and the prayers. Welcome to the Walrus Talks. I am indeed Shelley Ambrose. Thank you for being here at the beautiful Canadian Museum of History, as you all know, designed by the incomparable Douglas Cardinal, a four-time Walrus Talker. That's how he should be known, a four-time Walrus Talker. We're thrilled to have him back. There's always so much going on, not just here at the museum, but in this area, so we very much appreciate you choosing to be with us here tonight, especially on such a beautiful spring evening when you could be, enjoying yourself in the great outdoors. We are here along the Ottawa River in beautiful Gatineau in the Capital Region on the unceded territory of the Algonquin people. A very rich history of sharing and conversation here where we stand, and a very bright future as well. This optimistic project called The Walrus is all about the future. In fact, 2018 marks our 15th anniversary, so essentially we're just a startup. We're 15 years old. Our mission, yes, the startup continues. Thank you. Our mission is to be the place for Canada's conversation. We do this, or we attempt to do this, by producing events like the Walrus Talks, through the Walrus magazine, and at thewalrus.ca, where you can see and read our journalism and our storytelling and so much more. So some of you know how to play this game. Hands up if you read The Walrus. Yes. Now hands up if you subscribe, don't lie. Those, Verna, are walry. I know you said walruses. We say walry, even though it's not really a word. Our subscribers, thank you very much. We started traveling the country with the Walrus Talks 7 years ago. Tonight is our 92nd Walrus Talks event. Our 92nd. So hands up if you've been to a Walrus Talks before. Welcome back. Hands up if you've given a Walrus Talk. Anybody? Yell. Yes, yay. We've got some former Walrus Talkers in the audience. And hands up if you're brand new. So the former people, let's welcome the new people. Welcome. So for those of you new to us, the Walrus is a charitable not-for-profit. We have an educational mandate. We produce fact-based journalism. We didn't used to think we had to say this out loud, but we have real live human fact checkers. And yes, we used to think journalism meant that, but not so much. So fact-based, not-for-profit journalism. We also run a unique editorial fellowship program designed to ensure the future of journalism, not just at the Walrus, but elsewhere, is also bright. There's no way we can do the work that we do without partners like TD. TD is our presenting sponsor tonight. They've been supporting Canada's conversation through the work of the Walrus for many, many years, and they've been a crucial part of the evolution of the Walrus Talks. In fact, TD has previously supported this topic, the Walrus Talks, the Indigenous city, in Toronto, in Winnipeg, and in Edmonton. So this is our fourth, all new, all different talkers, but our fourth event on this crucial topic. We thought in the beginning that it would be a very interesting exercise to look at how a city might be built if we'd actually done it together. So welcome to our friends from TD. And Froze Austin from TD will actually join me at the end of the talks and will speak to us at that time. So here's how the Walrus Talks works. You can see the lights are up. You have a program in your hand. Don't put it away. You need it. You have to do some work too. You will see and hear 7 talkers in a row. I do not come up in between and like a jack in the box introduce them to you. Your program on the front is in speaker order. If you want to know more about the talkers, you flip it over and their bios are on the back. You will see and hear 7 talkers in a row. They each have 7 minutes. They know this. Yes, they do. And so just before they get underway, I'd like to thank each of them in advance. So thank you to Assistant Professor of the Department of Applied Human Sciences at Concordia University, Elizabeth Fast. Thank you to Algonquin grandmother and elder, Verna McGregor. Thank you to journalist and author, Tanya Talaga. Thank you to Inspire Laureate and resident cardiac surgeon at the University of Ottawa Heart Institute, Dr. Donna May Kimmaliardjuk. Thank you to artist and independent curator, Jeff Thomas. Thank you to writer for the Walrus and other places, Robert Jago. And thank you to the architect of this building and also the man responsible for Canada's entry into this year's Venice Biennale for Architecture, Douglas Cardinal. And thank you for coming. Let us begin.
Tanse, bonsoir, Elizabeth Dishnakauschen, Nemetean, Awapamatan. Good evening, my name is Elizabeth Fast. I'd like to acknowledge the Algonquin peoples as the caretakers of the land that we're gathering on today. The story I'm about to tell you takes place in Montreal and is about a 23-year-old woman named Anne that has lived in different cities all of her life. Anne is Métis, originally from Saint-François-Xavier, Manitoba. Anne wears the mucklucks that her auntie gave her, and people stare at her. She goes to class at university and learns a number of confusing things about Indigenous people. That they're very spiritual, that they mostly live on reserve, that they now deal with a lot of poverty and addictions. When she speaks up to say that there's more to being Indigenous than what they are learning in class, she gets skeptical looks from teachers and classmates. She tells them she is Métis, and they say, "You don't look Native. And what does being Métis mean anyway? Is one of your parents Native?" Anne has always wanted to go to the Student Center for Indigenous Students, but feels shy to do so. She didn't really grow up understanding what her culture is all about. She doesn't look very Native, and she's worried that someone will say she doesn't belong there. One day, after much reflection, Anne decides to go to a meeting that she hears about asking for the involvement of urban Indigenous youth. She meets some others that have similar stories to her own and starts to feel like she belongs somewhere. She makes friends with another young woman who is of Cree and European background. Anne and her new friends start attending different Indigenous music and art shows that make her proud to be Métis. Yet every day, Anne hears different things in the media about who does and who doesn't have the right to call themselves Métis. She knows that in her mom's own family of 11 brothers and sisters, many of her aunts and uncles hide the fact that they are Métis because of all the racism that they experienced as kids from neighbors and teachers. Sometimes Anne feels so distressed and confused that she thinks it might be easier to shut down that part of herself that feels this pull to learn more about her culture. One evening, Anne comes home particularly upset and confused because someone said to her in an offhanded way that there are those who are really Indigenous and everyone else, and she took this to mean everyone else like her. That night, Anne has a dream about her great-grandmother, Marie Cochin. In the dream, Marie tells her, "Anne, being Métis is beautiful and something that we fought hard for. We wanted you and your children and your children's children to always be able to be proud that they are Métis, no matter how many times over other mixes are added to your beautiful beings. Your Sioux, Cree, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, and Nakota ancestors married fur traders and taught their children to be proud of their Indigenous and French ancestry. The infinity symbol means that the blood, both native and non-native, runs through you forever. We don't believe in blood quantum. That's a concept that was invented to destroy us, to make it easier to take away the lands that we've used for hunting and the rivers that we've used for fishing. My own father was part of Riel's troops in the Red River Resistance, the first attempt at Métis self-government. He was a target during the Reign of Terror after the Manitoba Act came into effect in 1870, and the British government put into place troops to visit vengeance upon the Métis. The scrip system was designed to ensure that we had no entitlement to land, and my mother and father signed those documents, and I ended up growing up in ditches as one of the road allowance children. Anne, one day you will get the opportunity to learn fiddle songs on a beautiful old violin, and I hope that you grab onto that chance, and any other chance that you have to get closer to your culture and your ancestors, because it is only then that we can all heal. Not all people understand what it means to be Métis. Many are ashamed. Many have parents and grandparents who will pass on their fears that come from this dark period where we were being dispossessed from our traditional lands. Use the sash to explain to people who we are. Red is for the blood of the Métis that was shed through the years while fighting for our rights. Blue is for the depth of our spirits. Green is for the fertility of a great nation, the Métis Nation. White is for our connection to the earth and our Creator. Yellow is for the prospect of prosperity. And black is for the dark period of the suppression and dispossession of Métis lands. Anne whispers in her dream, "Thank you, grandmother, but how do I continue this journey in a good way?" Noshishim, by asking this question, you are already on the right path. You're forming a new community with your Indigenous brothers and sisters and upholding our voices. You carry the blood of our people, but also of the settlers, and it means you'll have extra responsibilities to walk lightly and educate others. There'll come a turning point soon, a great rumbling that will have the capacity to open people's eyes to the damages that came with the arrival of our European ancestors. But it will be rocky times. Our people might turn against each other out of fear. By remembering the teachings of our ancestors, humility, bravery, wisdom, honesty, truth, respect, and love, you'll be able to be proud of who you are. Our hearts have been closed for too long. I watch over you, Noshishim. I see you in your classes at university, and I worry about you. All the teachings are up here. You'll learn about the word reconciliation, but you won't hear about justice or love. You'll hear people use the word relationships without really understanding what the word means, that it doesn't just mean living with humans, that it's about accountability to all our relations. We have such great capacity in ourselves, our spirits, our emotions, our physical selves. So get out of that classroom often. Find ways to get connected to your ceremonies and show others what it really means to love. Not just loving your parents or your children, but that deep love we have for all beings, for our plant and animal world, for our spiritual world. Anne woke up and felt like part of her was still in a dream. She walked into her living room, and although she had never owned a sash, she saw one sitting on her couch. Marcy, all my relations.
Hello, I'm back. Your Algonquin Walrus. I was asked to come and do an opening originally tonight to welcome you, and Claudette Commanda was supposed to give the Walrus talk, but she was unexpectedly taken away, so tonight, that's why I say I'm your Algonquin Walrus. And I wanted to talk about tonight the importance of sacred sites here in Algonquin territory and all across Turtle Island. So I have a little slide here too as well. And first of all, I say welcome to Turtle Island. For us as Anishinabek, we'd always thought North America's Turtle Island, and I've taken this off of Facebook. But what it says is, how did our ancestors know that North America is shaped like Turtle Island? Because the turtle is very significant to us as Anishinabek. I always say too as well, Ottawa was very significant for us as Anishinabek. When I say in the beginning, I say, Wagush, Nedodem, Ashejunim Kipanesi. My clan is Wagush on my mother's side, Onimki Panesi on my father's side. And our clan system was based on the watersheds, because for us as Algonquin, we're known for the birch bark canoe. You'll see that in the museum here. And so the clan system based on the watershed, you have the Gatineau River coming from the north. We'd call that Tanaga Dinsipi. And you have the Ottawa River coming from the west to the east. We say Kitchisipi. You see that in downtown Ottawa. It's Kitchisipi. It's Kitchisipi, big river. And the Rideau River, which is a funny little river, I say, it's a north-flowing river coming from the south. So we have rivers coming from the four directions. So the significance of Ottawa is that we'd meet here with coming by canoe. And incidentally, I did a project on climate change, and when I did a public speaking, I bring my canoe, and I said, we traveled carbon-free. Maybe we need to do that as an Indigenous city again. So here we are. We have the Chaudière Islands, which was significantly also with Victoria Island, because it was a meeting place. We'd meet here in the summer, because in the winter we'd go off to the hunting grounds, and we'd come together like we're doing today and talk about what's going on the territory. For us as Algonquin, we're known as Omamaninawak, the nomads, because we had vast territories. Why? Because our understanding is if you stayed in one place, you start to deplete the resources. You start to dirty the water. And then we moved with the animals, the medicines. So the concept of a city for us was a little bit different but it's not really, because look at how many people commute today. So it's just a different concept. So, but again, going back to, we considered the Chaudière Islands as sacred, specifically Victoria Island. It's a place to come together to also do ceremony. And today you hear the controversy today with the development of the Chaudière, which has become so complex. But for us, we were also one of the first in terms of, for Samuel de Champlain, to bring him up the river here. And when he first saw the Chaudière Falls, he said you can hear them by 3 knots away, which is like 3 miles. That's how powerful they were. And they've changed too as well, and by the damming of the river. I also brought a picture. This is our traditional dress. But really quickly, I also brought a picture of another sacred site, which is Bon Echo. And again, too, as well, what happens is right there, you'll see the turtles in the rocks here. This is by Calidar. And the significance of that is also that it has the petroglyphs on the rock paintings. And you can visit them in the summer. They're thousands of years old. So again, but for us, I've done ceremony with our elders there. And one of the things, the concern was also that there's like rock climbing. They've been not well taken care of. And I remember going there with the elders, and they said, you know, one of his specific messages, we've welcomed all the newcomers to our lands here, and they've built places of worship. In our places of worship, what they said is, all Mother Earth is sacred, but there are certain places that are of significance. They are also our places of worship, but they haven't been honored. So again, I was thinking that my talk tonight is, what is reconciliation to as well as how do we honor these sacred sites? Now that, for example, going back to the Chaudière, they've become also prime real estate. So what's reconciliation? And now, when I'm talking about the Indigenous city, this is a recent structure that was by the Portage Bridge. And again, it's called a gathering. You'll see the center. It was done by Manuel Baez, who's a professor at Carleton University. And he had the center which represents Turtle Island. And he etched the rings of a tree in the middle. And you can't see it on the picture. And it represents time. And he placed the benches in the 4 directions, representing the newcomers to our land and our growth outwards. And the other part is also the dream catcher. And the significance of the dream catcher is that it's a reminder that we're all interconnected, and what we do to the earth, we do to ourselves. So in the end, now from an Indigenous city, from an Algonquin perspective, also this past summer, the 150, we saw our creation story being highlighted as part of the mosaic at Jacques Cartier Park. So again, too, as well, that exceeded the it exceeded visitors beyond their projections. So again, like Indigenous city, I think in summary, what I think is also, I think we still have a journey to go together. And I think it's interesting, but also too as well, it requires the opening of our minds and our hearts, and as we grow together. So on that note, I say miigwech.
Bushu Hanin. My name is Tanya Talaga. I'm very grateful to be here this evening. It's always good to be back on Algonquin unceded land. Thank you very much for having me. I am going to talk to you tonight about a perspective from Northern Ontario. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a perspective from the Anishinaabe from Northern Ontario. You see, my grandmother is a member of Fort William First Nation, and my mother was raised on the traditional territory outside of Thunder Bay on Fort William First Nation's traditional territory. And today I'm going to talk about what is an Indigenous city. But I'm going to sort of unpack that a little bit, because to me, perhaps a better question is, what is a city? What does it mean? When I think of a city, I think of a community. I think of inclusion and exclusion, of who belongs and who decides. It is about how we make space and how we welcome others. Because to me, a city is not defined by buildings, by glass or concrete or roads or restaurants. To me, a city is built by people. It is about people who function as a community for the greater good. It is apparent to me that Indigenous and non-Indigenous people have two very different viewpoints of what makes a city. I'm going to borrow a story right now, a story from a scholar named John Long. This is taken from his book, a book that I'm actually reading at the moment. This book is called Treaty Number 9. John Long had a conversation with an elder from Moose Cree First Nation on the shores of James Bay. They talked about inclusion and exclusion. This is what the elder told Mr. Long. He said, when the white man builds a campfire, he builds it so big, he builds a roaring fire, blazing away for all to see. The fire is usually so big, people have to sit back, away from the blaze, so they don't get burned. Now, said the elder, when an Indigenous person builds a campfire, the fire is smaller. It is contained. It is built carefully, so everyone can sit around the fire and closely enjoy its warmth. Inclusion or exclusion, a burning, glorious blaze, or a small fire for everyone to share. As I said earlier, the city of my mother's birth is Thunder Bay. It is a city that I write about, both as a journalist and as an author. I'm going to explain a little bit to you about Thunder Bay if you're unfamiliar with it. Port Arthur is the white face of Thunder Bay, and Fort William is the red face. Port Arthur lies on the north shore, and it is full of beautiful tree-lined streets with homes with views of Lake Superior. The red side is located down by the Kaministiquia River on the Ojibwa's traditional lands near the base of Mount McKay. For more than 10,000 years, Indigenous people built a thriving society along the banks of the Cam or the Gitchigami, which is Lake Superior. Before the whiteface came to town, this is where the action was, as this was the rivers, and the traders used the rivers as highways. They were for commerce and for meeting. But as the railway was built, as Canada expanded and residential schools proliferated in the north, the dynamics changed. You should know that there were 17 residential schools in Ontario, 2 were in the south, and 15 of them were in the north. The colonial fire was large and it was burning bright. For a long time, it has been hard to see the small fire. But Thunder Bay is not unique. To me, Thunder Bay can be every city in Canada. Indigenous people, you see, are often caught in a world of not belonging to the society we have been displaced out of, and of not belonging to the society that we are forced towards. So when I think of an Indigenous city, I think of building a community of belonging, of how Indigenous people make their own community in places that we did not build. We build our own city by our community. I think of the community Indigenous people in Thunder Bay have fought to rebuild and have fought to be a part of against so many odds for so long. I think of, as well, Anishinabekwe Nation, a political organization of 49 Northern First Nations, and I think of the hard work that they do every single day to bring about belonging. You can see the people from Anishinabekwe Nation, from a territory that's roughly the size of a country of France, north of Thunder Bay, east to the James Bay coast, north to Hudson Bay, and west to the Manitoba border. These are the nations that make up Anishinabekwe Nation, and they all come into Thunder Bay for many reasons, for social services, for health services, to find work, to go shopping. And every single day, the leadership of Anishinabekwe Nation, which is housed in Thunder Bay, they work about bringing belonging to their people, to all the people from the north that are coming in to the city of Thunder Bay. And they do this in the face of great adversity. They do this when they see every day, they'll hear stories of their children who are getting pelted with eggs or being called dirty Indians as they walk to school. It is where the daily newspapers run letters to the editors slagging the local Indigenous leadership or print headlines making a joke of throwing eggs at Indigenous people. It is where an Ojibwe woman, Barbara Kentner, walked down the street only to be hit in the stomach with a metal trailer hitch. When she was walking, her sister, who was beside her, heard one of the car occupants say, "I got one of them." But the beautiful thing about the Indigenous city that is being created now in Thunder Bay is that everyone who belongs to NAN is from far away. They are from those 49 communities that I was telling you about, and they have all come into the city to build a better future for their children. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story about city building. This is in Thunder Bay, and this is mostly a personal story, but it's a story that I was on with Anishinabekwe Nation. And it's about November 1st, 2017. On that day, we held a public memorial for the lives of the 7 fallen feathers. The 7 fallen feathers are 7 high school students who had come to Thunder Bay to go to high school because there are no high schools for them to go to in their own communities. So they have to leave their families, their culture, everything they know at the age of 13, 14, or 15, and they move to Thunder Bay to get a high school education. And on November 1st, we remembered the students that we lost. We walked as a community from Dennis Franklin Cromartie High School, where 6 of those 7 students went to school, and we walked down by the McIntyre River. And why we walked on this day, November 1st, was because that was the 10-year anniversary of Reggie Bushy's death. He was a 15-year-old boy from Poplar Hill First Nation who had moved to Thunder Bay to go to high school. And it was kind of a cool thing on that day of November 1st, 2017, because on that day, the invitation went out to everyone in Thunder Bay. It was on Twitter, it was on Facebook, that we were going to do a walk from the high school and go down to the water where Reggie died, and we were going to remember all the students. And on that day, we walked in a big procession, all of the high school students. We invited the Thunder Bay Police, and the Thunder Bay Police came. We actually got on loan a bus from the Catholic School Board, who helped us bus the students back to school after we had made the long walk down to the water. And then we all went back to the school for a traditional community feast. And it was a feast put on by many, many hands. And on that day, we sat together, all of us, and it was a small campfire, and it was inclusive. It was our Indigenous city. We invited others to be with us that day. And I really do hope, going forward, that Canada can join us all. Miigwech.
Good evening. My name is Robert Jago, and I am a writer at the Walrus. Notice, if you look at your programs, it says writer and not speaker. So, lower expectations. So I write on First Nations issues for them. I'm a citizen of the Kwantlen First Nation, part of the Stolo people, who are a Salish people on the west coast, in a region we call Soltamekwu, otherwise known as the Lower Mainland. I was born and raised off reserve in the city of Richmond, a suburb of Vancouver. My family moved to the Katzie First Nation, another Stolo reserve, to the east of the city when I was a teenager after my cousin James went missing. Our family was quite involved with the search for him. Because of that, people didn't go to work, bills went unpaid, and the reserve is where we ended up. The situation there wasn't the best, and so after a time, I returned to the city when I was 18. Without plans, without money, I ended up homeless very quickly after moving to the city. And in a practical sense, what that means is I spent some time on good days on the couches and floors of relatives, and on bad days in doorways on the downtown east side. As a consequence of that experience and not being able to access resources and not being able to navigate the system to get support, I ended up losing about 60 pounds in a few months and was constantly sick. It was one of those days that I was sick. It was a bad day, and I couldn't find a place to stay, so I was wandering down Hastings Street, and I ended up doubling over and throwing up on the street. Now, on the downtown east side, if you don't know it, it's a very, very busy place. It's very crowded, there's lots of traffic and lots of people on the street, but for the most part, if you are one of those people, like I was, you are completely invisible. But on this day, I wasn't invisible. A Native woman saw me. In my memory, she looked like Tina Keeper. And she came over, and she picked me up, she cleaned me up, she made sure I was okay, she called me a papoose. And then she went on into a dive bar. And of every memory, that one sticks with me the most because of what it meant. It was the first time that I was down there where someone saw me, where someone recognized me as an individual. And it helped me remember what it was like to be a person. Because the experience for many Native people in the inner cities of our cities, of our major places, is that you're not seen, is that you're completely invisible, and that you fall through the cracks very easily. Native people in the inner cities are often described in stereotypes as drunk or dangerous, as beggars, or just generally as a problem. But seldom, at least as individuals, are we seen. And not being seen means that we miss out on help, it means we miss out on care, and it means we miss out on resources. This fact is why a host of grassroots Native organizations, like the Bear Clan in Winnipeg, in Thunder Bay and Regina, the Wolf Clan in Montreal, and the Crazy Indians throughout the West. These are community service organizations started by regular Native people, not by chiefs, not by activists, but by regular, hardworking, tax-paying Native residents of the city who take their time to go out and help and find the weakest of our people, the ones who fall through the cracks. Groups like this exist because we're not afraid of each other. We can see each other without that built-in fear or defensiveness. These people are there bringing food, getting them help, keeping them out of danger, noticing when they're gone. When we look at the crisis in Thunder Bay or the loss of Native girls and women in Winnipeg, when we look at the day-to-day racism the Native people see in our cities, it's because we're both not seen and not seen as individuals. When you're kicked out of Starbucks, it's not necessarily for what you've done to yourself, but it's for what someone's perception of you is. It's someone's perception of what they think people like you have done in the past. And this is what it is for us. I know on the face of it, it seems trite. And I know people are doing things, I know people out there creating awareness, but from non-Native-led organizations, it's the wrong kind of awareness. To be seen, you need to be a person and not a problem. And it's hard to think of us as anything but problems when even now in the reconciliation era, 100% of the outreach and the work done to bring us together presents us that way. Everything from these people is about the litany, the residential schools and the 60s scoop, missing and murdered Indigenous women, and on and on and on. They're important, but focusing solely on them misses the 99.9% of the rest of our lives. Back in October, I was in Thunder Bay, and while there, I met the local diversity committee, the government-funded diversity committee. Two white women, both older, who told me about their work to make a scene, to bridge the gap, to solve the problem of racism in Thunder Bay. They talked about their upcoming seminar on white privilege. They boasted that one of them had seen a Native kid being yelled at on the street and berated a white shopkeeper about it. And good. These are good things. I mean, I suppose you want to do that, but it's too much of it. It can't just be that. Knowing that racism exists, knowing that abuse exists, explains why so many of our kids need help. It explains why so many are preyed upon. It explains why so many turn to drugs or alcoholism or gangs. But knowing that doesn't make you want to give someone a job. Knowing that doesn't make you want to rent your place to them. Present us this way, and this is how we're all seen, the other 99% of us. And again, this is not Native people doing this. This is non-Natives squandering our political capital, berating other white people about their privilege, and ham-handedly reinforcing stereotypes that hold us back. White people yelling at other white people doesn't help Indians. These people in Thunder Bay made me think of those Ontario teachers who thought it was a brilliant idea to take down the name of Sir John A. Macdonald for everywhere. And It's not a bad idea, but it's a bad use of our political capital. Political capital, public goodwill, is a finite resource, and rather than move things forward, this triviality exposes us to abuse and ridicule. White privilege as a concept is valid. McDonald was bad. You won't find an Indian that doesn't say that. McDonald was not, we're not keen on him. But it doesn't move the ball forward when it comes to inclusion and acceptance. Remember, it's about outcomes. It's about ensuring that there's someone who can see you and pick you up when you need it. I met the anti-racism groups. I met the people at City Hall. I met the reps for MPs, and on and on and on. I met all of these people, all of these white Canadians, and from them was a barrage of negativity, creating events for masochists, but not for regular people, and certainly not for families. It's all so frustrating. None of it is about us. It's about them and their guilt and self-flagellation. I get so many messages and emails from this type of white people apologizing to me vicariously for the sins of the white man. It is gross to be included in that. It is to be unwillingly roped in to their weird shame fetish. Meanwhile, the real work in places like Thunder Bay was done across town at the Blue Sky Center, where natives like that woman I met on Hastings Street 2 decades before work every day. In that community center, they don't have a white privilege night, but they do have a traditional painting night. They do have a traditional food night. They do have language lessons. They do have places where we bring people together, where we include non-natives by sharing our cultures. I asked the people from the diversity committee what they thought of these events. They said they knew about some of them, but were afraid to go. They didn't feel welcome. You hear this so much. I talked recently to a Canadian-based writer for Slate, the wokest of the counterintuitive woke. He was all over the masochism and the finger-pointing and guilt, but couldn't imagine a Native event that was fun. Think about the breakthrough in gay rights. Think about how the Chinese community is seen. Think about how the South Asian community is seen. Have you ever met someone that didn't want to go to a Chinese event because of their safety? When we think about the Chinese community, do we think first of the head tax? When we think of the Indians, do we think first of the Komagata Maru? No and no. We think of cultures because that is our interaction with them, and cultures by their nature are open. The interaction with us isn't culture, it's problem solving and guilt mongering, and it's ultimately unproductive. We natives, in our own efforts, lead with culture and openness. But these efforts are undermined by non-native organizations, self-described allies, that drown us out with their negativity. Alternatively, they're shut down by our own self-identified native academics, standing at the gates of our culture like guard dogs, growling and barking and scaring everybody away. If we want to improve things, we need to work around these people, and we need to make people want to spend time with us, which is how I end up back at Richmond. Richmond has 200,000 people, 23% of whom are white. Sometime in the next few months, Metro Vancouver as a whole will join Richmond in having a non-white majority. At that time, the era of Vancouver's white majority will finally be over after 130 years. Greater Toronto will follow shortly after. Ottawa, Montreal, Calgary, Edmonton, maybe in the decades to come. These people aren't natives, but many are immigrants, and polling shows that immigrants aren't afraid of us. A generation later, though, they are. They become immersed in the culture, they learn the narratives, and they're taught to fear us. As for those who do fear us, the former white majority in these cities, the Boucher and the Fontaine verdicts and the reaction to these have shown that we are a lot further behind than anyone thought. But a culture-first approach can get us around them. It takes advantage of the demographic opportunity we have in our cities. Leading with culture, they won't be taught to fear us. They will become a part of our lives. In 2018, these are the majority of people that walk past our kids on the street. These are the ones doing the hiring. These are the ones renting out the apartments. They're receptive, we need them, and we have so much in common. In reality, reconciliation is surely dead. Maybe it doesn't even apply in cities. Maybe it never applied in cities because on the ground there, so few people belong to that settler class. But in its place, we have the more honest work of relationship building and reciprocity and giving and sharing, a relationship that we control. These values are at the heart of our cultures on the West Coast and are at the heart of many of the new immigrant cultures. Culture First doesn't ignore the problems of racism and dispossession. Those are real and those must be addressed. But it is a parallel path, separate from the negativity, separate from white guilt and shame, so that these places that we share, we can build something together on our terms. A common home where we can be together and look out for each other. It doesn't come from the culture, it doesn't come from the government or the culture warrior academics. It's from the ground up. It's from regular, hardworking, tax-paying Native citizens of the city. These places that we're retaking and re-establishing our civil life in, we're doing it free from Indian-Act governments. We're pushing past misdirection of our allies. We're doing it on our own with the Wolf Clan, with the Bear Clan, with the Crazy Indians. We are leading without guilt. We are leading with culture, with simple acts of humanity, like that woman on that night on Hastings Street. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, I have to go after that. So I'm Donna May Kimmaliardjuk. I'd just like to thank the Walrus and all of you for being here tonight and for thinking I have something of value to say about city planning. Because I must admit, when I received the invitation to speak tonight, I felt a bit surprised. I thought, what do I, as a doctor, know about city planning? Not a lot. But then I realized healthcare, that's a huge component of city planning. And so tonight, my speech might take a slightly different angle than my co-speakers tonight, but what I hope to leave you with in these 7 minutes is this thought when it comes to city planning in the urban Indigenous population. Let's focus on what we do know and address that. And let's also figure out what we don't know and then address that. So why should Canadian cities care about the urban Indigenous population? Well, it's a population that's growing, and it's growing quickly. In 2006, according to Canadian census data, the urban Indigenous population was just over 620,000. In 2016, that number grew to over 867,000, up nearly 60% in 10 years. Urban Indigenous people comprise over half of the total Aboriginal population in Canada, and it is the fastest growing segment in Canadian society. I don't think I'm alone in saying this tonight in that I don't think cities are doing enough to incorporate and reflect the cultures and values of the urban Indigenous people. And healthcare and health services are definitely not immune to this. Urban Indigenous people are more likely to face barriers in accessing health services due to discriminatory policies and practices. For example, jurisdiction in and of itself is a significant barrier to health services provision. Often bureaucracy has led to inequalities in access to health services to urban Indigenous people compared to Indigenous folks living on reserve. The type of healthcare that's available is also a barrier. Access to traditional healing practices is as, if not more important than access to mainstream healthcare for majorities of urban Indigenous people. Additionally, many health services and health programs are charitable, which is great, but evidence that there is currently inadequate funding of health services for the urban Indigenous population, and relying too heavily on these nonprofit funding structures can lead to services being unevenly distributed and unstable. So putting this together, I don't think it's a surprise for those of you in attendance tonight that Indigenous people living in urban areas are at greater risk of poor health outcomes. So what can I and others as healthcare providers do? I mean, I'm just one person, I'm just some doctor. Where do we start? How do we even make a positive impact when well-being is such a multifactorial entity? Well, I think the biggest area that you can make a positive impact as a single individual frontline is just ensure that you are delivering culturally appropriate care. I mean, what good is our care if what we're saying to our patients they don't understand? Or if they feel so uncomfortable with us because it is clear that we do not have an understanding of their culture and their values. Hospitals, medical schools, nursing schools, physio schools, pharmacy schools, all types of schools should collaborate and partner up with Indigenous organizations and government to develop and implement cultural safety training programs. Let's ensure that there are centers providing traditional healing practices in our cities and that healthcare providers actually know to reference them. When we look at the urban Indigenous population, the goal of providing healthcare and health services should be to provide adequate, accessible, and safe healthcare. So now how about at the government and policy level? How do we improve the healthcare outcomes of the urban Indigenous population at that level? Well, I truly do believe that using a social determinants of health framework is applicable and effective in trying to understand and improve the health of this population. But again, where can we start? I mean, trying to address social determinants of health is complex, timely, and an expensive endeavor. Well, what the thought I'd like to leave you with tonight is let's start with what we do know. And what we do know is that the majority of the urban Indigenous population is made up of women and young people, people under 30 years of age or younger. And so health services should prioritize care to these populations. For example, individuals who have higher levels of education, higher incomes, and secure housing tend to have better health. Yet high school completion rates and post-secondary completion rates amongst Indigenous Canadians continues to be lower than that of non-Indigenous Canadians. Communities that can work with Indigenous organizations and government to create ways to increase high school success rates and implement employment programming and opportunities can greatly improve the well-being of urban Indigenous peoples. Also, let's understand that some women come to urban settings to escape violent, abusive relationships, and there are many lone parent families. Thus, services addressing family violence, childcare, and urban transition, including income support and safe, affordable housing, are critical in helping to address the overall well-being of urban Indigenous women and children. And lastly, what about what we don't know? Well, there's a lot that we don't know. There's scarce, and I'm going to use this word, data, or scarce information on the urban Indigenous population. There's scarce information on health utilization. The Indigenous children population is rapidly growing, and yet we don't know a lot about them. There's also high mobility amongst urban Indigenous people within the urban setting and also between rural and on-reserve and urban locations. But yet the understanding of this and the connections with services is greatly lacking. So overall, there's a lack of long-term information on the socioeconomic status, urbanization, and health of Indigenous people living in an urban setting. So when addressing the health and well-being of the urban Indigenous population, we must consider the social, political, economic, and cultural experiences and inequalities of urban Indigenous peoples. And let's ensure that we're providing adequate, accessible, and safe health care. So again, let's focus our efforts on what we do know and address that. And let's figure out what we don't know and address that. And I truly believe that this will lead to healthier, thriving cities for all. So thank you so much.
Wow, there's a lot of you out there. My name is Jeff Thomas. I'm Onondaga, Turtle Clan. My family's from the Six Nations Reserve in Southern Ontario. I was born and raised in the city of Buffalo, New York. I thought long and hard about how to condense almost 4 decades of work looking at indigeneity excuse me, within the city, and how to kind of cull it down to 7 minutes. So I kind of took a departure from my usual presentations where I just start talking, and I actually wrote something for tonight. So we'll see how that goes. I should probably also mention too that I'm based here in Ottawa, and my journey on the path to understanding the urban world began in 1979. I was in a car accident traveling between Six Nations and Buffalo, and I fell asleep and hit a telephone pole. I was trying to get back to go to work, and that was the first time that I had actually directly faced racism when I was in the hospital. I had a broken neck and they thought that I was a malingerer. So it kind of transformed me in terms of looking at my life and social issues and what I wanted to do. And because I couldn't work again, my plans to move to Six Nations were curtailed, and I began to focus on what I thought my elders had prepared me for, which was to address the urban world. And to them, I give thanks, and I'll begin. While I was considering a topic for my presentation, I began reviewing what I had accomplished during my career as a photo-based image maker and curator, and if I had achieved my goal of connecting two words, Indian and urban. I decided to begin my presentation with a story that took place when I was 10 years old and eventually culminated in this building, the Canadian Museum of History, in 1998, when I curated the exhibition Emergence from the Shadows. I just returned to Buffalo. Now I'm beginning to go back to my childhood as a reference point here. I just returned to Buffalo with my grandmother from a weekend visit at the Six Nations Reserve. It was a humid, late summer evening, and I walked to the corner store to see if my friends were around. It was late, so I sat on the steps of PS number 19 and waited. The night was very calm and muted, and my mind began to drift and recall what I had learned from my family elders. I mentioned PS number 15 because it was my grade school at the time and where my first protest took place. My elder, Miss Emily General, was a former school teacher on the reserve, a land rights and traditional governance activist, and one of the founding members of the Indian Defense League and of the Woodland Theatre Company. The theater company production centered on stories of important Indigenous figures from the past like Joseph Brant and the Huron peacemaker. Being with family elders on the reserve was the polar opposite of my life back in the city, where there seemed to be no place that nurtured my growing Indigenous identity, or to help me navigate the slippery slope of fitting in that often heads down for people like my father and my grandfathers. Although I was young, I was old enough to know that there were challenging cultural and identity issues associated with life in the city for Indigenous people, yet no one seemed interested in talking about them. But my questions continued to build over the years, often inspired by Emily and her stories of activism and her thoughts on the importance of knowing our history. When I returned to PS number 19, I asked my teacher why we didn't learn about my history as well. When my question was brushed aside, I refused to recite the Pledge of Allegiance we had to say every morning until a compromise was reached. I had to stand, but I didn't have to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. So the night I sat on the school steps, I said to myself, remember everything you see, hear, smell, and feel at this moment, because this is who you are. What awaited me was a challenge of finding a way to put my questions into action. Emily once said during a conversation with friends, I wonder what happened to the information the anthropologist from Ottawa had collected from Pa. I wanted to prove to Emily that I was sincere about the questions I was raising, and I made a vow to track down the anthropologist and bring her news about her father's records. My vow returned to the forefront of my work in 1993 when I moved to Ottawa to begin a research project at Library and Archives Canada. Within 3 years, I was invited to co-curate my first exhibition with archivist Edward Tompkins. The title was Aboriginal Portraits from the National Archives of Canada. The title reflected my thoughts on the archive becoming somewhat like a family photo album for the Indigenous community and for challenging Indian stereotypes held by the non-Indigenous community as well. In 1998, Gerald McMaster, then curator of Indigenous art at the Canadian Museum of Civilization, invited me to curate an exhibition based upon photographs in the museum collection, produced by anthropologists during their fieldwork in Indigenous communities across Canada. I was excited to work with this archive because a great deal of the fieldwork had taken place at Six Nations, beginning in 1913. One of the anthropologists I highlighted from my exhibition was Francis Knowles, a physical anthropologist from England. I found his glass plate negatives in the museum's cold storage vault, and I recognized names Knowles had written on the negative sleeves, people I had heard my elders speak about. Written on one envelope was the name Chief Jacob General, and I wondered if this was Emily's father. When I put the negative on the light table, I immediately saw a striking resemblance to the old black and white photograph Emily had hanging on her dining room wall. The image showed an aged man wearing coveralls and sporting a handlebar mustache, and he was posed by towering stalks of white corn. I was shocked and overwhelmed by the connection I had made. The unfortunate part was the fact that my elders had passed away. I could only imagine the conversation we could have had. The exhibition ran for over 2 years, and in the end, I asked the museum to donate the prints to the Woodland Cultural Centre in Brantford, Ontario. The center put the portraits on display and invited people from the reserve to add information to the database. I had finally fulfilled my vow. In 2017, I added a new wampum belt to my series, Where the Rivers Meet, commemorating the influence of Emily and the vow I made, and also including the photograph of Chief Jacob General on the right-hand side. I want to end my presentation with a return visit I made to Buffalo in 2001. I drove over to PS number 19 to photograph the school steps. The building was still there, and where I sat that summer night, a sign now was over the doorway that read Native American Magnet School, and the Haudenosaunee flag was flying overhead. The friend I visited in Buffalo told me his son was now teaching Native American studies at the school. We may not change the physical structure of a city, but in the end, we have control over our voices and how we raise our children and inspire them to write their own stories. We have to create a positive environment and listen to our children's questions. We have to become the explorers and navigators of the New World Order and build a new form of architecture that begins with the empowering of the imagination and provide our children with a reason for living. Just as my son was looking out the streetcar window in the first photograph, we must not settle for surviving colonialism and residential schools. We must dream, question, and explore. Thank you. I'll just end by saying that it's been a long road in trying to come to some sort of conclusion about urbanity and how it reflects to us as Indigenous people. And I think in terms of sitting here tonight and being in the museum has been a part of my journey in looking at collections and determining what can be used, what can be utilized, how we can incorporate it into that quest for self-determination. The battle goes on, and my work continues to build on this narrative. And in the coming years, I'll be producing more projects. And also, I think we've reached a point as well where it's time that we do bring our work back to the children in our communities and to the larger community. The idea, I think, in the end, is how do we build a world where we get along with one another as opposed to always finding the differences. And my hope is, by being out and speaking in public, that I can raise an awareness of that, not only of our stories, but listening to those stories and incorporating them into what now is becoming quickly an Indigenous city. Thank you.
Good evening. Welcome to our museum. My name is Douglas Cardinal. I'm an architect. I remember when I was working with the elders, I felt that they wanted me to be able to deal with the white paper that was put out by Pierre Elliott Trudeau by showing how they wanted to be able to look at the future and provide proper education for their children and develop a concept of Indian control of Indian education to get rid of the residential schools. So And of course, the elders always believe and always taught us that we have this gift of life, and all of creation is beautiful. It's all good. There is no bad. There's just good and a crooked good that needs to be straightened out. And the white paper was sort of a crooked good because the elders asked me to come and deal with that white paper by presenting some alternative solutions and how they would look at the future. Rather than be terminated, as the government of Canada wanted to do at the time, was to be able to thrive and to be able to make a contribution to the future. So so the elders asked me if I would please put together their vision to deal with the white paper put out by Pierre Elliott. And so I was asked to actually learn all the ceremonies and be part of understanding the really heart and base of the culture by going on the many rituals and ceremonies that the elders had inherited after thousands of years. They've kept that knowledge alive. They're the books of knowledge of our people. And so I was asked to go through all the ceremonies with them, the fasts and the sun dances and the vision quests, the sweat lodges, and all of these ceremonies that teach you how to live in harmony with yourself, with your fellow man, and with all life around you. And to be taught in these traditions was a tremendous gift, of which I had the opportunity. At the time, it was difficult because many of the teachings were not allowed. Indeed, there was an elder that was highly respected where the people on the reserve were asked to, in a sense, participate in nailing all the windows and doors shut to his cabin and burning him alive because he had the audacity to carry the teachings and the culture of our people. So the elders at that time decided that the only way that they could practice the ceremonies was go to the mountains. So they had a camp in the mountains called Small Boys Camp that followed the traditions, the ceremonies, and the way of life. In this camp, of course, women were highly respected because we actually come from a matriarchal, matrilineal culture. The Anishinaabe people and the Haudenosaunee people virtually had clan families. And it was the women that made all the decisions at home, and all the women made decisions in the community, and the women made the decisions for the nations. And as men, we revered the mothers of our children and revered our mothers. And so, in reverence for the women in our lives, we implemented those decisions. That was our job as men, to implement the decisions. Right now, of course, we have an upside-down world where it's a patriarchal system of power and control. And that's the colonists that came and imposed this patriarchal system on us of power and control. Whereas ours was a peaceful culture based on loving and caring. And that we were taught that the power of love is much greater than the hard power of force. So there's a different way of seeing the world, a different worldview. And in presenting to Pierre Elliott Trudeau and the cabinet at the time, which I was asked to do by the 52 chiefs of Alberta at the time, in learning the teachings of the elders, that's how I met Pierre Elliott, actually, by presenting this vision to the cabinet of how we saw ourselves in the future. And that in many ways, our goal was to teach the immigrant culture to love as we love, to teach them to care for each other and care for the environment and care for all living things. And that because all life is sacred. So that was the vision that we presented to the government at the time. And he was very moved. And at the time, he had not yet married or had children. But he said, if I had children, he said, that's the place that I would send them, to a place like that. And he was very inspired by that. And so I think he changed his mind about terminating our culture, in fact, to put Indigenous rights in the Constitution. So it's always doing things in a loving, caring way, in a positive way, I feel, is the way we can change things in the world. And then at the time, his crooked good also was to centralize all of the resources. And of course, that totally wiped out Alberta at the time, because the companies just moved away from Alberta who were going to develop the oil if the federal government was going to take over the resources of Alberta. So we, as a firm, did the work that we were to do as architects was lost. And so we thought, well, we can't be a regional architect anymore, serving just Alberta. We have to expand to be a national architect. So we were looking at ways to become a national architect, and then Pierre Elliott Trudeau put out the competition for the National Museum, and so we said, we're going to have to do that project because that would be able to help us survive and make a contribution at the same time. So we have to broaden our perspective, and we have to be part of this competition. So I went back to the elders, and they said, yes, I mean, it's very important. You must realize all of our Anishinaabe people always regarded for thousands of years Ottawa is our capital of all of our Anishinaabe nations. From the Atlantic to the Rocky Mountains and south, Ottawa was always our center. Always. Really, it was our Indigenous city. Ottawa means a place where you come in peace and trade. And so tribes that were not Anishinaabe, tribes from the south, tribes from all over, would come to Ottawa. And the Algonquin people were the host nation of this sacred area, because why it is really a sacred area, there are 3 rivers that come together and flow, come north, south, and from the west. And these 3 rivers flow to the east, the rising sun. And that's a very powerful symbol in our Anishinaabe culture. So Ottawa was always our center for thousands of years. There's artifacts all around here that are 6,000 years old. I know that many of the people here try to hide them or even destroy them because they don't want our presence in the in this Ottawa, in the capital. And that's what's happening right now, that our sacred islands and the sacred waterfall and the kettle, the Grand Kettle, is in a sense being taken over by developers and the government of Canada to build condos so that our sacred sites will be lost, because they don't want our presence in the nation's capital. And so that's the problem we're facing right now. That land is unceded territory, and it is just being stolen, like all of our land in Canada has been stolen through subterfuge and pretty awful games that are being played. And when I was in out west, the elders say, we want you to be able to come up with a powerful vision in that center, in the National Museum, because most of our sacred objects are in the National Museum. There'll be some day that perhaps we can get them back. They were taken from us, and so a lot of, and so it was very important to house these sacred objects in a sacred place. So they told me, you have to put together a building that really is a sacred place for people, a spiritual place for people. And so we went together and we had a vision together for the National Museum. And when we presented the vision to the people and the Prime Minister who made the final decision, he selected it as the vision for Canada because he said it is not a colonial building. It doesn't represent another country outside of Canada. It actually it represents the land itself from Canada, and therefore it should be a building like that, because we're all come because we appreciate the land. We appreciate the beautiful country of Canada, and it's appropriate to have a building that reflects the land itself that's here. So he selected me to be the architect of his vision for the National Museum. And I must say, I may not have liked his politics, but he was an amazing client. And he really was extremely supportive, because when I presented him the design of the building and the fact that I wanted it to be made of stone, and that it wanted to feel like it was like the stone of the Rocky Mountains that are carved and formed by water and by nature. And when he saw the model, he says, "Of course, I understand what you're doing here." He says, "I'm a canoeist." He says, "When I canoe, I can see how the water swirls and forms," and he says, I can see what you're doing, because you're relating to the water and you're relating to the land." And so he made sure that it was approved, and he supported the design. And and he was the kind of person that he wasn't fixed. He could change his mind about things, which I found extremely helpful in many ways in my discussions with him. So the museum is his vision, and also the vision of our elders out west. But when I came to Ottawa, the people, my elders said, "When you come to Ottawa, you go see William Commanda." because William Commanda is the Algonquin elder that has a vision for the nation's capital. And when you go there, make sure you give a tobacco offering to the Great Kettle and to the falls, because we've been doing that for thousands of years. And so it's so important that you do that and recognize that Ottawa is special in our hearts. That's where Parliament is. That's where a lot of our ancestors are buried. And the museum is where people would come with their canoes and before they went around the falls. And so it has a lot of significance for us. It's our sacred site for thousands of years. And so when I went to see William, of course, he said, he really gave me a history of the whole area, and I spent a lot of time with William. And we worked with the National Capital Commission, Jean Piggott and Marcel Baudry, and both of them planned that it would be given back to the Algonquins, because it was taken from the Algonquins, because they wanted to, they met William Commanda's forefathers, a delegation from Queen Victoria, and that's why that area is called Victoria Island. And there was an agreement made that, and they struck coins and everything and had a big ceremony, that they would only take the pines for the tall ships and leave everything else to the Algonquins. That was the agreement, because they needed the pines to build their huge navy, because they wanted to create this big empire, and the huge tall pines in the Ottawa Valley and all these rivers and everything, they needed to create their navy. But unfortunately they not only took all the wood to create this empire, but they also took the land by force and forced the people away from their sacred site. And I feel it's very important to regain that site, because it's precious to all the Anishinaabe people. The Algonquin people are the host nation, but it is important for all Anishinaabe people from the Atlantic to the Rocky Mountains. And as a Blackfoot, I'm Anishinaabe as well. So just to give you some history of this Indigenous city, Ottawa, and just have you understand how important this area is to all of us. And you know, there are people here having ceremonies and living in peace with each other, and with strong governance that were respectful of people. Indeed, the American Constitution, the first democratic government, was based on the great law of the Haudenosaunee people, their basis for governance. So the American Constitution is actually based on the governance of our people. So we were, in a sense, treated everyone as sovereign. Everyone has a responsibility to the Creator, because they have been given this gift of life. And it's so important, and that's what we're taught. We're taught that you have to take responsibility in how you treat people. You have to treat people in a good way. That if you are a person that loves freedom, you have to understand that the fellow human being that sits across from you is the same, so you have to support and respect his freedom too, or his or her freedom. And it starts by taking responsibility for that. And you have to take responsibility for the fact that the only way that you survive is because of all your life givers. And all your life givers are the birds, animals, fish, all the plants and herbs and medicine, and all those beings that give up their lives so that your life is sustained. And so you have to realize that you have to respect all your life givers. And so all your life givers need to be respected in that way, that you have to understand that and be humble that everything around you, you're dependent on everything around you. So when you plan for the future of 7 generations, you have to plan for the future of all 7 generations around you. And those messages, we've been asked to, in a sense, represent Canada at the Biennale in Venice. And we're to bring these messages to the Biennale in Venice. And that will be at the end of May that we're going there. So now we're putting all that together. And
Coming with the scissors. Okay.
And you can ask Adoya, my wife here.
Hi. It's over. It's covered.
If you need any information about supporting that presentation that we're making with 18 other architects in Canada and United States, which we call Turtle Island. There's no borders for us.
Yeah. So we can talk all about, he's here, right? And he has a lot to say, as you guys can see. So why don't we then just join you outside? And thank you so much for your patience. Thank you.
I'd like you all to join me in thanking, thank you, Miigwech, Haichka, to Elizabeth Fast, Tanya Talaga, Dr. Donna May, Jeff Thomas, Robert Jago, Douglas Cardinal, and the Algonquin Walrus, Verna McGregor. Also, please now join me in welcoming from our presenting sponsor at TD, the Manager of Commercial Services and Credit, Feroz Austin.
Bonsoir tout le monde. Good evening, everyone. C'est un plaisir d'être ici avec vous pour assister à cet événement ce soir. I am thrilled to be here on behalf of TD at tonight's The Walrus Talks, the Indigenous City. Having this event at the Canadian Museum of History is significant, as it weaves together the importance of our Indigenous people and their culture with Canada's rich history. Cela nous rappelle que les efforts qu'il reste à faire pour apprendre des erreurs du passé et soutenir le principe de réconciliation. Reconciliation is still decolonization. Nous devons continuer à travailler ensemble pour ouvrir les portes vers un avenir plus inclusif. On behalf of TD, I would like to thank the Walrus Foundation for organizing the National Walrus Talk series that gathers Canada's brightest minds to spark important conversations. And TD has been supporting, as Shelley said, the Walrus since 2007. And honestly, Shelley, we really thank you for the opportunity to engage in your mission of creating forums for conversations on matters vital to Canadians. Votre dévouement à soutenir nos écrivains, nos artistes, et le débat d'idées est essentiel pour la démocratie et la santé intellectuelle de ce pays. Nous avons eu la chance d'entendre parler 7 individus exceptionnels, leaders dans leur domaine de connaissances et experts de la pensée autochtone au Canada. So thank you for sharing your insights and encouraging Canadians to start the conversation about Indigenous life in our cities. At TD, nous nous engageons à créer les conditions nécessaires pour ouvrir les portes vers un avenir plus inclusif, pour que chacun ait l'occasion de réussir et de participer pleinement au monde d'aujourd'hui et à ce que l'avenir nous réserve. TD recently launched a new global corporate citizenship platform called The Ready Commitment to help open doors to an inclusive tomorrow where everyone, no matter what, has confidence in what tomorrow brings and feels connected to their community in a way so that we may all play fiddle songs, so that we may all gather in and around the ring, so that we have no more fallen feathers, and so that all may be seen on Hastings Street. Un exemple de cet engagement est notre longue histoire de soutien aux peuples autochtones. La TD investit considérablement dans le développement économique et social des Autochtones, et ce, en 2017, nous avons investi 6,8 millions dans les communautés autochtones. From our exceptional Inuit art collection, the largest collection in the world outside of the Inuit community, to our employee Indigenous circle, to our summer reading clubs, we have worked with over 123 communities and organizations to increase financial security, better health, improve the environment, and connect communities. Important conversations like these are being had today, and they are crucial to fostering knowledge, connectedness within and between communities, and they help us learn about Indigenous culture and about each other. They force us to embrace our similarities and to respect our differences. Le dialogue nous rassemble tous pour un meilleur aujourd'hui et un avenir plus inclusif. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Please enjoy the rest of the evening. Bonne soirée.
Thank you, TD. Thank you, Froze. Nicely done. As I mentioned, this is the 92nd Walrus Talks. That means there are now more than 600 Walrus Talkers and 600 7-minute videos, some longer, that you can watch whenever and wherever you want on our YouTube channel. You can just go to thewalrus.ca. You can also subscribe to the magazine at thewalrus.ca. But why do that when you can do it tonight in the lobby with Kaylin, so that the next time I say, are you a subscriber, you don't have to lie. You can tell the truth because you're here tonight. For you, 10 issues of The Walrus a year, it's only $20. If you sign up, as we always say, we practically bring it to your door ourselves. So subscribe out there with Kaylin for $20. You can also sign up for the newsletter. That's free. And that will tell you when we're next in town. I can tell you right now, we're next in town on September 28th or on September 18th. But you can also come with us all over the country. We got a big bus. It's really fun. We don't have a bus, but you can still join us wherever we are in the country. Also, as a part of our goal to keep the conversation going, we've launched Faya. That's a chat bot. Faya was created by an Ottawa tech startup called MC2 with support from Imagination 150. And Faya is also out there with her creator, Giovanni. So go say hi to Giovanni and visit with her and see how Faya interacts with you on Facebook about the ideas you heard tonight and some ideas you might want to share about the future of the country. I'm almost done. Thank you to our national partners at Inspire, Shaw and Shirk, and our local partners at the Hill Times and here at the Museum of History. Thank you, Mark O'Neill, for hosting us. Thank you to the entire team from TD for making tonight possible. Thank you, Verna McGregor and the Algonquin people for welcoming us to this territory. Thank you all for coming, and please join us at the reception where there is food, there is drink, there is Kaylin, there is a chat bot, and if you are there, there will be great conversation because the truth is you are the walrus. Thank you. Good night. Safe home. Miigwech.